We've got our 5 whiskeys to talk about tonight, and I've basically let Evan decide everything about not just the order of the whiskeys in the calendar this year, but also the order we're going to taste them in tonight. So we're going to just actually go in order of how they featured in the calendar. So we're going to start with the Kingsbarns. We're going to move on to the Milk and Honey STR wine cask. I know it doesn't say STR on there, but it's STR. We're then going to go on to the Cameronbridge, then the Boulder, and then we're going to finish with the Kilchoman. And Evan, I don't, you may have already said this, but like, did you plan this out Machiavellian style to like have each 5 whiskeys somewhat be in an order that might make sense for us to pour them in a tasting like this?
Yeah, I honestly try to, although I think the next round will probably be my undoing when it comes to that.
It might have been challenging, but there's
yeah.
there's other things to balance in addition to flavor profiles. So, but good
yeah,
on you for doing that, because it would never have even occurred to me to think to do that. So, proving your worth and such, as it were. Joining us is our colleague Marty.
Yeah,
I think there was concern he wouldn't be here, but he's here. And he's logging in, so we're gonna give him a little screen time here too. Marty, we're just gonna make you, or actually Evan, I think you have to make him co-host tonight since you're the grand poobah.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we've got a pretty good crew here right now. It looks like Rob and Kelly are here.
Ooh, the Carpenters. This is
Tom and Viola from the island.
Yeah, from Sydney Peninsula Quake. Yeah, we obviously got Jeff here again to fact check us and challenge us on things we say. And looking across we got Peter in Ontario again, and a lot of other usuals. So nice to see you all and have you on. And yeah, we're gonna get rolling in a moment here. We're just waiting for 1 or 2 more just to see if we can tease out a few more people. Evan, before we get to that, is there anything we should share?
So if you're local to Calgary and part of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, you probably got the email. And that is regarding, we have not just January up, but also February and March. The Outturn tastings can be signed up for via our website for both in-store and virtual tastings for those, just so we can try and plan ahead for how many sample kits we have to pour versus live tastings and so on and so forth. So we'll see how that works out, but always exciting to have the Outturns coming up as well.
And Evan, I think we should probably add that if you're out of town, you can take part in our virtual tastings.
Totally, so, absolutely.
Not that we're trying to compete with our friends at the Strath or Legacy or Keg and Cork, but if you're maybe not local to one of those markets and would like to take part in the Outturn tastings, we're a welcoming bunch. We're happy to have all comers for those tastings. So
absolutely.
And that reminds me, we are going to dump some tastings online at some point, Monday or Tuesday, including our Burns Bash, which is going to be Wednesday, January 25th. We're bringing it back for the first time in 3 years. It's a frugal festival, price-wise. You don't get a glass, but we keep the price down. We usually have some deals. And it's on Wednesday, the 25th proper, because the following day I'm intending not to work for reasons entirely of my own. That we don't need to get into or dwell on, but they're selfish, I assure you. But it's also properly Burns Day on the 25th. So if we're gonna have a Burns Bash, it should probably be on the 25th.
It's cool to get back into the festivals. I mean, we did do some last year, but we will be doing our first Burns Bash in a couple of years, and I think it's in March. We're planning on doing our first Lassie's Olding Whiskey Festival again for a couple of years. Right. That was the last festival and I think last tasting we did before COVID really hit the fan in 2019.
It was the tasting where we all asked ourselves whether we should actually be doing it.
Yep.
And most people that were like, I don't know, but we didn't want to not come. And the next day, I think, is when things really started. The screws started to tighten, as it were. Yeah, we're looking forward to having that back. That's an event we do in support of the Brenda Strafford Society, which is a local, one of their main charities is a women's shelter, second stage women's shelter. So happy to bring that back. And we try to highlight female voices in whiskey at that event too. So
Absolutely.
yeah, look forward to it. Certainly we hope our friend Kelly, who's watching here tonight, will take part in that because she's been a great supporter of it over the years. But anyway, you're here to try whiskey.
Before we go on to it, and we did mention this last time, but just because tickets seem to be going fairly quickly on it from what you've said, the other big charity event that we have is the MS Whiskey Festival.
Yes, so more than 3/4 of the tickets have sold, almost 80%. The max participation this year at the event is 600 people. At some point later next week, we're also going to be launching 3 master classes that are going to run during the event too. So unfortunately, the VIP is sold out, so you can't get tickets to the VIP, but there's still going to be a lot of great whiskeys poured on the main festival floor. And yeah, we're looking to have a good event again this year. But on that note, Evan,
let's dive in. And I think Marty is just going to be trying a few of these for the first time as well.
Yep.
So once again, day 6 is Kingsbarns. That's where we're starting. So very, very young distillery. And one of the things I've tried to do in doing the lineup, and without spoiling too much, but there might be 1 or 2 more where it might be your first chance to try some whiskey from said distillery in the calendar box. It's been a pretty good year for obtaining minis from some of the younger stuff. Yeah, like we've had Lindor's, now Kingsbarns, which is owned by the Weems family.
Weems,
Weems. Yeah. A distillery that's been around since I'd have to take a look at the blog post, but I think it's around 2016 or so. So definitely on the younger side. And a lot of these younger distilleries seem to be sort of in the lowlands area, which is really neat too. Lindor's Abbey is not too far away. Same with Daffmill from where Kingsbarns is.
But don't get excited. There's no Daffmill whiskeys.
No, that would be amazing.
That would have been like knock the roof off. However, the 15-year-old is coming. Once again, we're the only retailer in Canada getting any, which is awesome, and will irritate many other people. But what are you going to do? Who are we to say no to exclusivity on Daffmill 15 years? So, but yeah, cool. As Evan said, there's some other interesting things coming up, which we're quite sure you've never tried before. So,
absolutely. So yeah, Lowlands Distillery tends to, or seems to be, at least this is actually my first time trying a Kingsbarns, was this mini bottle. I think we do have a couple open in the shop, or we've had them open at festivals. I just haven't had a chance to try them yet myself. But definitely has that sort of lowland, sort of light fruit note to it. Has some really nice acidity and citrus coming through on the nose as well.
Evan, I'm sure you're on the same page with me on this. It's impossible to try everything that comes through the store. We'd like to, but we also are not alcoholics, though we may appear to be.
That's right.
We're professionals, and there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah, I found recently there's been a lot of customers like prodding me to try stuff that I haven't tasted, so that I can give my opinion on that. Where I just haven't gotten to it yet, but that's what happened with the Amrit Spectrum today, which was pretty darn fantastic stuff.
Yeah. So Evan, I kind of interrupted you slightly, but I think also I'm not sure which tangent you were headed off on, but we have had independent bottlings from Weems over the years. We've they disappeared for a while. They are back. We've got a selection of both blended malts and single malts from Weems right now. But yeah, it's kind of a cool distillery. They're a family that's obviously been in the industry for a while. And I don't know if this was covered in your blog post, but they have a Ducat. Are you familiar with what a Ducat is?
So they mentioned it on their website, and I read about it, and I still didn't quite figure out what it was. It's kind of like in one ear and out the other for me.
It's like a dove house. It's like you raise doves for the purpose of eating them, basically. It was very hot circa 700-800 years ago in Europe, and continued by aristocrats for a long period afterwards. But in Scotland in particular, I believe they call it a Ducot just because it makes it as opposed to a dovecot or something that you could start working backwards from and determine what it might actually be. But I've been in it. I don't believe when I was there that they actually still had doves in it. I think the market for eating pigeons is probably not quite what it used to be.
Yeah, they're more for racing nowadays, I think.
That's right. Yeah, that which again is another thing aristocrats love, racing doves.
Yeah.
So
My not doves, but I had an uncle that raced pigeons in Calgary for decades.
yeah. Did he have
Not an aristocrat though? Definitely not an aristocrat.
more like a rooftop cage?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Kelly's impersonating Santa tonight for reasons that are unbeknownst to the rest of us. But what do we think of the Kingsbarns single malt?
It's pretty approachable stuff. Like I like how it's put together. This is the term STR, and Jim Swan will probably come up quite a bit over this calendar. Has already, but STR casks are part of the makeup in this, including I think it's that ex-bourbon and a little bit of sherry, if I remember correctly.
The nose at first I think was quite sweet and fruity with a bit of malt, but I find after a while it kind of fades away. And
yeah,
this is a young single malt, and if it's been partly matured in STR, I would say very little of it was matured in STR because it's quite pale. Doesn't have a ton of color. The palate I think is more approachable, and it's a nice sign of what's to come with this particular distillery. But I would say quite lowland, what you would consider typically lowland traditionally in style, in that it's very light, delicate, and kind of floral.
Yeah, so Dustin says, like the Lindors, I'm enjoying this one, liking this lowland style. Yeah, and it's kind of nice that we can kind of like Campbelltown, although to a lesser extent, and maybe that'll be something we'll be talking about 5 or 10 years from now a bit more as a region with a style. But lowlands with all these distilleries coming up, we're starting to sort of see stylistically, at least in youth, what the lowland style is, which is really cool.
Here's an interesting thought for you. Would the distilleries in this particular pocket of the lowlands, Fife, would they band together and have Fife become a whiskey region?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because there's you've got Lindor's Abbey, you've got Daft Mill, Kingsbarns, and then I think there's another little one in St. Andrews. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, isn't that like Eden Mill or something like that?
Yeah. So
that's more than Campbelltown.
More than Campbellton currently has. So is it a region?
Should be.
Marty, what are your thoughts on this?
It's a bit spirity and young on the nose, but it's nice, a little bit white fruits, a bit of apple tone to me. On the palate, I get a bit of black pepper coming through on the aftertaste. So
it's quite peppery.
Yeah. But it is overall, pleasant to drink. I'm not really getting any off notes, so it's nice.
I'm perhaps being a little hard as I am often want to do, but I find it a little coppery, so it's almost like I get a bit of faints still coming through.
Okay.
Now, keeping in mind, traditional whiskey making, single malt making in Scotland, most distilleries historically perhaps were not as good at making their cuts as a lot of the newer ones are, like your Kilchomans, your Aaron's, and a lot of the newer distilleries. So I don't know, maybe this was like a broader cut than some. I've been to Kingsbarns, it's been a long time, so I can't say that I remember this, but I don't know. To me, even though it's light and very delicate, it tastes to me like, maybe that there's some faintier notes coming through in it.
Yeah.
But
would you say that's the maybe that pledge-esque note that's coming through as well?
I get more Mr. Clean than Pledge, if I'm being honest. But I like it. I think it's got some character. I think it's got promise.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing with a lot of these young single malts and makes them a bit of a challenge is even when they're good, like, are people going to buy these to drink them in volume? I think it's easier for the distilleries that are peating their malt with young whiskeys to have a spirit style that people want to drink consistently. Whereas I think this is kind of like, it's something to keep your eye on until it actually fully reaches maturity. And that's the difficult thing with young single malt.
Well, I think that's a pretty good sort of segue into our second dram, which is also from a young distillery, this time Milk and Honey. But before that, should we talk about the bottle of the day for day 6?
Oh yeah, that's right. Those are all up on the blog. Evan, you're much better at sharing these things than I am.
Yeah, I got it.
I don't even remember what it is. I'm going to be surprised when I see that it's up there. The Port Ellen, yes. And what's interesting, and I'll be, unfortunately, because we're now on full screen, I can't see them as far as looking for nods, although I can see them here now. But I believe Rob and Kelly might have been present with me when we selected this one. Were you guys with me at Douglas Lang's office, like their office in I think you guys were with me on when I selected this cask, but I can't remember. It's so long ago. But this cask was actually selected while we were on a whiskey tour of Scotland. It was the first thing we did in Glasgow before we headed to the West Coast. And we were up in the library at what was then Douglas Lang. It was before the Hunters and the Langs, or the Douglases and the Hunters, had their feud and went their separate ways, splitting their empire. And what was cool about that was that we were basically allowed to taste whatever we wanted in their library. So they would be like, what do you want to try? And someone might say, do you have any Brora from 1976? And they would like rifle through the thing. Yep, here you go. Oh, Glengarry Royal from 1972? Sure, yeah, let me just see what, oh, we've got 3. And which one would you like to try? Like, it was this kind of surreal, fun tasting. But one of the surprises for the people who were with me, and I believe it was like Rob and Kelly and Barry and Daryl, and I can't remember everyone off the top of my head. What's that?
Stevie Boy and Mama.
Oh, yes, of course. Anyway, oh yeah, because Stevie Boy tried to marry off his daughter to Stuart Lang, if that sounds about right.
I think that's right. Yes.
Yeah, he even signed the card, or the thank you book we left them, signed your future brother-in-law, Stevie Boy, which was quite funny. Also, Stevie Boy, incidentally, is a hugger. So that was fun for other points in the trip. But yeah, we selected the Port Ellen. So yeah, that happened way back when at the offices of Douglas Lang, and Rob and Kelly were there. So cool that we actually managed to bottle a Port Ellen. We were technically supposed to get a second, but that was around the time the feud tore the company asunder into 2 parts, and that second cask never materialized.
Was Stevie's daughter also involved in that? Is that what happened between the Langs there?
It could have been. It could have been a dowry too high for the Langs to want to pay, but we can't be sure of that. That's all speculation and hearsay and complete utter falsehoods.
I still have my bottle of this that I have not opened yet. So one of these days I'll get to it.
Marty, I keep saying the same thing, but the days keep ticking by, and
yeah.
But anyway, we'll see. Maybe I'll get to those. But I think just as a milestone for the business to bottle a Port Ellen, there's not a lot of retailers, period, that got to bottle a Port Ellen, and there's certainly very few in North America that bottled a Port Ellen ever. So that was quite a coup. Something I'm very proud of. So
yeah,
Evan, let's go to Israel.
Yeah, so we are going to Tel Aviv for the Milk and Honey distillery, and this is from Milk and Honey's Elements line. Again, a younger distillery. It's been around since started operations in 2014. Not in the lowlands this time though. And part of their claim to fame being in the middle of Israel is pretty much everything they produce, and I think it is actually everything they could produce is certified kosher, and that includes red wine and sherry casks that they use for finishing whiskeys. So they managed to do that, and they are another one of those distilleries with the Dr. Jim Swan sort of seal of approval, I guess, when it comes down to it. This red wine cask, I believe, is partially, they use some STR casks and then some red wine casks in the finishing, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I'm going back on memory here too, but I think some of the wine casks were also Israeli wine casks from wineries.
Yeah, from what they said on their website, it's pretty much all Israeli wines, which is cool. And this one was a wild one to taste. I don't know if it was my palate at the time, but it started off on the fruity side of things, but got into some garden vegetables and into cocktail sauce notes as well for me, and a touch of horseradish on the palate. Yeah.
Well, this might be a whiskey Jenny might like then.
Yeah.
She loves the shrimp cocktail. Yeah, I can see that on the nose, especially. And I now that you mention it, like I can see like caramelized like carrots and turnips on the nose.
So yeah, Milk and Honey has been doing some cool experiments with different casks along the way as well. They've done some was it aging they were doing just off a Dead Sea as well
They
for some of their stuff
casks along the Dead Sea. We've actually got some of that in our allocation we'll be bringing in soon. There's also a pomegranate wine cask, which I'm pretty sure is not something that the SWA would ever allow you to do, but it's very Israeli thing, so kind of cool. The nose I find is despite the oak, I find a little bit hard to tease out.
Yeah, I found the same thing, and the palate does go into some char notes, but that's again where I'm getting that sort of smoky, sweet shrimp cocktail sauce with just a touch of horseradish for me on the palate.
So on the nose, I'm getting like almond butter, like oatmeal cookies with raisins kind of tones, and a little bit of fruit underneath it. But the palate's kind of weird and wacky.
Yeah, it goes from sweet and veers into savory without going into like super funky notes at the same time. I guess horseradish could be a funky thing for whiskey, but it's definitely more on that side of things than ginger for me.
It's interesting that you mentioned the smoke, because that hadn't really clued into me at first, but like I'm actually getting quite an ashy note, especially moving towards the finish. So
and I'm assuming that's the STR cask again, or just the barrel char from the STR.
Yeah, definitely seems like a wood ash to me, not a peat smoke type.
Yeah, cool distillery with a lot of offerings. As always with some of these new distilleries, I think it's in their innovative things that they're doing, where there's something interesting in the short term, again, while we wait for their product to hit maturity. But I guess one thing worth noting is that 3-4 years in cask in Israel is kind of like Kavalan, like it speeds up the maturation. It's a very hot climate. Imagine especially those Dead Sea ones. That's going to supercharge the oxidation. It's going to supercharge the absorption of things in and out of the wood. Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that one. I mean, I guess it's not what I thought. I guess it's not what I was expecting. There's not really a wine character to it. It's more, as Marty said, like wood ash. And
I tasted this at work, and the first thing I did, since it was a red wine cask finish, was shove it in Kurt's face just to see what he thought, because he tends to absolutely almost have truly have a physical reaction to it, to red wine cask finishes, where it's almost like he has to make the sign of the cross and get that thing away from him when he does nose and taste them. But he actually did not mind this one, and it is one that kind of falls on the interesting side of things for me. Like
It's
even on the
definitely
finish now, it's reminding me of artichoke hearts in brine for some reason.
Okay. I'm picking up a little bit of like red grapes, that type of, a little bit of a juice from that, but no lactic note. So it's not, I mean, that would be my problem with wine casks is you often get a sour lactic note, and that's not here at all.
Tom and Vi say salty toffee.
Good call.
Yeah, but it's salt. Yeah.
I can see that there's this kind of salted caramel, salted toffee thing going on for sure. Evan, maybe what we should do for Kurt whenever he has to taste a wine cask matured whiskey is get him like a garland of like garlic or onion. What I don't remember what it is to wear around his neck.
For him, it should probably just be a garland of Ardbeg is probably going to do the trick.
That might be doable. We'll see. Cool. Interesting. I'd like to see how that evolves. Yeah. What's our bonus dram today? Remind me, Evan, what I wrote you.
So this is one of our Evan Williams casks.
Oh yeah. And Marty, do you remember? Did we do 2 different Evan Williams casks?
I only remember one, and
Okay.
I drank this bottle a long time ago, so I only remember one.
Yep.
Well,
and
Marty,
I definitely had one too, and this was well before my time working at Kensington Wine Market, but I definitely purchased one.
and Evan, I have to say, or sorry, Marty, I have to say, if we were going to trust anyone's memory here, it would be that of the nuclear physicist and not of the professional drinker. So if you say there was probably only one Evan Williams cast, there is a good chance there was only one. But in my head, I was like, I'm sure we've done 2. And I just can't find any trace or record of it. I suppose if we had done 2, I probably would have bought a bottle of it. But again, maybe not. Like bourbon's never really, as most people know, been my thing. So it's hard to say. But still, very cool that we did one. And not only that, I believe it was a 10-year-old. Like that was back when there was still age statements on the single.
Yeah, it was 2002 to 2012, which was, imagine if you could do that now.
Right. Well, Evan, I think it's time to move on to our hump dram of tonight's tasting.
So this is we're going into something a lot older from 2 whiskeys that were fairly young. This is 27 years old, and it is a single grain from Cameronbridge Distillery. Again, bottled by that boutique whiskey company. This is from batch 4, and they've done batches that have been older than this apparently. But this is 48.9% alcohol and quite light in color. Yeah, as Ross says, how's this so pale at 27? It's almost like this was just sticking around in glass demijohns for the last while or something.
Just because of who our guests are tonight, or 2 of our guests, I just want to share my glass on the screen there and see if they recognize anything special about it. Rob's saying no, he doesn't recognize anything. Yeah, this is old grain whiskey. It doesn't have a ton of color. Ross is asking, how is that so pale? Because it's probably a refill, 2nd or 3rd fill cask. It's far from the palest dram we've had. I mean, I think the Tianinic we had the other night, granted it was just 10
I think it was lighter. Yeah.
It was definitely paler than this. But the thing about old grain whiskey is, you want it to slowly, softly evolve. You don't want too much wood, because if you have too much wood, it's going to start getting very bitter and astringent. First fill cask maturing grain whiskey for 25, 30, 40 years, not exactly ideal.
Yeah, this was another one where I got some interesting notes on the nose and palate personally. It is not wood heavy though. And we've definitely had some, and in fact we do have another much more wood heavy Cameronbridge from Cooper's Choice right now. That's essentially the same age, from 1992. But this one's like Tzatziki and dill is something that really came on the nose for me, but it right now even it's kind of like you're just cracking open a can of Sprite on the nose, just that sort of like citric and fruity effervescence.
Or Evan, if you will, maybe some fizzy bubala, because I mean, you said tzatziki, so all of a sudden I'm going to Opa. Maybe some Greek Mediterranean food, possibly maybe something a little Israeli, little fizzy bubala to go with that would be nice.
Good call. Yeah, Ross is getting the dill now. Tom and Vi say ice cream and dill on the nose. That's a good call.
I am going to be honest here. I am also kind of out of the corner of my eye watching the Flames Leafs game, and here's the Leafs are like whining about not being tough enough or something, which is quite irritating. So, but anyway, I digress. If there's any Leafs fans in the room,
too bad.
yeah, I'm really sorry you guys haven't won a cup.
Yeah.
Back to the Cameronbridge.
Being in the center of the universe there. It's
Evan, I know you're really proud of this, and rightly so. We have some extra content for today's whiskey too, which I think is up on YouTube. Dave Worthington and I had a little chat about this one, and in said chat, I took a dig at David Beckham's whiskey. As you might, because I remember when it was released, I thought it was just the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. Next to like whipped cream flavored vodka. I mean, it was right there with that kind of nonsense. But Dave had to correct me a little bit because apparently it was quite a hit in the UK, where young people don't necessarily aspire to class or good taste. As is, what's that? Robin Kelly might be able to type this out to me. What's that sort of high alcohol cider beverage that they all get messed up on? There's something that they drink. Rob might know this. It's not really material, but Evan, while Rob's typing this out, do you want to show them what you put up on the blog? Buckfast, that's right. Yeah, they get messed up on Buckfast.
Yeah, so this is the style of the bottle of Head Club has always driven me nuts. Where it looks more like a cologne bottle than So I even managed to Photoshop in Eau de Parfum on the bottle and take out the single grain whiskey because I think it just makes much more sense. Yeah.
This is why we're always running from behind and not getting everything done at Kensington Wine Market, because
there's always
on the
like very important work to do. That's like this.
Evan, I only wish I'd seen that before you put it up, because I would have found a way to somehow incorporate, flagging Qatar's holding of the World Cup and David Beckham getting paid $250 million to tell us how great a country Qatar is. So despite the 5,000-ish people that died building their stadiums because they have no rights. Are we going to get sued? I hope not. These are just things I've heard about in the media that I'm repeating. So not necessarily strongly held convictions, but like, seriously, I hate that Head Club concept. I remember when I tried it, and I actually tried to be open-minded, and I came in open-minded with extremely low expectations. And it was even worse than my extremely low expectations. So.
Still managed to to limbo underneath your expectations.
It did, yeah. But hey, there's no accounting for taste, as they say. So
this one I like it's not like a super heavy whiskey at all. Like it's crazily light and fresh for something that's 27 years old.
This is what we would call crushable. Like you could sit, even on a hot day, you could sit outside with some buddies, a couple of glasses, only because John Glazer said it was okay to do it. Maybe you throw an ice cube in there too, and it's like a bit of a cocktail. And you just crush old grain whiskey. That sounds pretty good. And this is cheap as chips, Evan, isn't it? Like it's
the full-size bottle is like $110, $105 or something like that.
Is it that? Well, we should raise our price.
Yeah.
Sounds I'm actually looking this up. I think you are too, but it strikes me that this was very reasonably priced.
125, pardon me.
Yeah, 125. I granted it's a 500 ml bottle, but it's 27 fucking years old. Like that's anyway. I like it. I mean, there's people who like grain whiskey, there's people who don't. But it's a very, for the style, I think this is nice. It's also not oak heavy, so you are getting the spirit character, what little of it there is from grain whiskey. So yeah, I think this is a cool bottling.
Yeah, and we're essentially 2 for 2 thus far for boutique drams that are like very approachable and quite inexpensive, which is really cool as well.
Yeah. Marty, we've barely let you get a word in.
It's okay. I do like older grain whiskeys. This one is not as appealing as I'd like. For me, I often find it a bit more honeyed on the palate, but it is very light. But it's, for me, it's not the boutique dram that's doing it.
Oh, Evan, I don't know that we've mentioned this, but it's worth talking about because it's hilarious. Do you know the label story on this one?
No, although there is a YouTube video that you guys can watch for that, but let me see if I can bring up the label where you're talking about that.
There is a YouTube video on this. It's not written up on our site. I think Dave may have sent me these details, and I'm gonna have to look back through my emails, see if I have them. But they wanted to have a professional athlete on the cover of this, kind of as a nod out to Head Club. So they did not put David Beckham on there for obvious reasons of lawsuits. I mean, someone with a fresh $250 million, you know, probably hire pretty good lawyers. With that oil, that's, or what is it, Qatari oil money. But no, they put the world Palinko champion. And apparently there are world championships of Palinko. I have to admit, I had no idea what Palinko was prior to him telling me this guy is the world champion of it. But I think it's just like flipping things with your finger, something like that. Like you flipping little discs or something. I don't know.
So not the same as pachinko then, is what you're telling me.
Oh, maybe it is pachinko. I don't know. I don't know. I'm not.
Pachinko is Japanese, and it's more akin to like a gambling.
Oh, you know, it's
Palinko.
I think it's Palinko because pachinko. Yeah, you're right. That's the way the Japanese get around the prohibition on gambling, where they do that thing. They get the prize, and then they turn the prize in for cash, which is the workaround from actually getting, you know, cash for your chips.
Yeah.
But no, he's the world championship of Palinko. I really don't know. Oh, it's Tiddlywinks. There, Ross has got it. It's Tiddlywinks, not Palinko. The world champion of Tiddlywinks. I would have got that if we'd actually had the blog or the description on the site, but we don't. I do want to comment though really quickly on something else. Ross Conrad, I think, said I think he was feeling a little butthurt about how England did today because it's been almost exactly the same amount of time since England last won the World Cup as the Leafs and a Stanley Cup. So it's a little rough.
Sometimes in the center of the universe, that's for sure.
Oh, Ross is a Croatian fan. I think it was Graham. Sorry, it was Graham who was really butthurt. So, but Ross is Croatian.
It's a good time to be a Croatian fan, that's for sure.
Are they still going?
They beat Brazil in penalty time, so Brazil's out, which is crazy.
I'd say I'm not really a soccer guy or football guy, but Croatia and I think Morocco, just for pure, how the hell are they in the, like, what is it, the semifinals, like, or quarterfinals, like
semis? Yeah,
semis. Crazy. It's
gonna be like
Brazil.
Another Japan versus Korea in the finals type deal.
That would be amazing. All right, we're losing track here. We're losing place.
Yeah.
We got to go back through them and see how they change and evolve.
So history in a bottle, and this is the 72 Glendronach.
Ooh, yeah. So this whiskey came about on a whiskey tour as well. It was a group that I took through the Space Side. Funny story. I had too many people sign up for the tour, and in the UK, because it was part of the EU at the time, I was not allowed to drive a vehicle larger than one that could accommodate 8 people because I didn't have an EU driver's license. So somebody from Slovenia could drive a larger van, but I could not because I'm from a country that presumably has unsafe drivers. Anyway, my mom came along with me, which is really funny, and drove the second vehicle. And true story, she backed into a light post in front of Michael Urquhart at Gordon MacPhail, which she did a little damage to the bumper, but the rental company never noticed. So that's okay. And the light post was fine. You'll be happy to know. But we had
Also
we had a
upheld
great-
that bias on Canadian driver's licenses.
That's right. And none of this is on the blog for obvious reasons. I'm just telling you because we're amongst friends here, right? No one's going to repeat these stories. But the one, like, this was a really fun group that I had with me. And I remember telling them, and as I would tell every tour group when I was in Scotland or Japan, don't buy anything I can get for you. Like, spend your money and bring home things you can't get in Canada. And we were at Signatory. They had a 40-year-old Bowmore, which was just stunning. I want to say like a 68, something like that, Bowmore. Doesn't matter what it was. And Peter, one of the guys on the trip, was like, I love it. Are you getting it? He's like, yeah, Peter, I'm getting it. And you can have however many you want, just tell me. And next thing I know, we're leaving the distillery and Peter's bought a bottle of this Bowmore. I'm like, Peter, what are you doing? I told you not to buy anything. Sorry, it was a 72 Bowmore. I told you not to buy anything that you couldn't get, or that I spend your money on things that I know I'm not getting. And he's like, yeah. We get like 5 minutes out of the Edward distillery where Signatory's shop and everything is. And I hear the bottle pop open. Peter purely bought a 40-year-old Bowmore just to drink between Pitlochry and Glenfarclas Distillery, which is about a 2.5-hour drive at the best of times. And they finished the bottle off between Pitlochry and
Well, I believe if my hearing of the story is correct, Brian was on that trip as well. Which
Brian
probably
was on that
helped.
trip, and he can drink like a superhuman as well, and certainly got to enjoy some rare treats because of. I think he and Peter took down 3 bottles of wine between the two of them one night after a day of whiskey touring, in classic fashion. But the Glendronach, back to the Glendronach, on this trip, one of the things we did was a warehouse tour, and we weren't intending to buy a cask on this trip. But we're going through the warehouse. We had an incredible tour and tasting with Alan McConaughey, the distillery manager. And at one point I said to Alan, you know, is there a cask in this warehouse where you would go and pull a sample from for a dram for yourself if no one was looking? He said, not that you're that kind of guy, but if you were going to walk the dog in the parlance, which cask would you pull a sample from? And he immediately took us over to Glendronach 1972 cask 711. And of course, the follow-up question was, can we try it? And he said, sure. And he poured us a couple of glasses, like a couple Glencairn glasses full to the brim like this for the 10 of us or whatever to try. Not each, but like to share around. And the second I nosed it, I knew I was in trouble because the people on this trip I knew were going to want bottles from this cask. And long story short, that's how our Glendronach 1972 came to be. My only regret is we didn't buy all 500 bottles. We bought 300 of them because it was a big amount of money and it wasn't my money at the time. But yeah, that was a gorgeous cask, possibly the single best cask we've ever bottled.
Right on.
I always regret not buying one of those bottles. So,
Marty, I can't believe you didn't buy, of all the things not to buy a bottle of, I can't believe you didn't buy a bottle of that. Yeah. Incidentally, and not that this is how you should value things, but at the time those whiskeys were $440, and now you're lucky to find them for $6,000-$7,000 at auction, which is mental. But anyway, Evan, are we going to Kentucky now? Or no, we're going to Colorado.
Yeah, no Kentucky in this round, but we are headed to Colorado in the United States. But in a twist, we are sticking to single malt whiskey. This is not a bourbon. There's no corn in this. It's 100% malted barley, and it is peated malted barley at that. This is from Boulder Spirits, which is works out of a distillery called Vapor Distillery in Colorado. And I think their peated whiskey is actually pretty cool. So they are sourcing everything, the malted, the peated malted barley, in this case, I believe from Scotland or from the UK at least. So, and then they actually, they have a guy, one of their distillers is Scottish and moved to sort of set up shop at this distillery. And So there, it's about as traditional and as Scottish as can get without being in Scotland itself.
Mhm.
Oh, and also they're using virgin oak to age the whiskey instead of
Right.
refill casks.
So Evan, this is going to be a moment of rare, unrequested praise for
Mhm.
American single malts. I normally instantly hate almost every American single malt I nose because I find without exception, they are almost all like
Mhm.
way too barnyardy. And
Yep.
I'm not getting barnyardy notes on this. I'm actually kind of intrigued.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a pretty cool nose, and I think I personally think they do bourbon as well, but their single malt whiskey is well put together. And it was number 3 char on the virgin oak cask that was used on this one.
Mhm.
But it's really chocolatey.
Yeah.
A bit of earthiness to the smoke, but more on the sort of the dry smoke side of things into a bit of like a really reminds me of beef jerky style wise on the nose right now.
Yeah, that's a good call. I was gonna say like on the palate, it's got a meaty like brisket barbecue sauce, like baby back ribs with like barbecue sauce on them kind of thing going on. The smoke is interesting. It's not a maritime medicinal smoke, so
No,
I would guess this is probably not barley peated with like Isla malt or with barley peated with Isla peat. This
yeah,
is
probably Highlands or Speyside.
yeah.
Jeff says he was expecting something more like McCarthy's. Yeah, McCarthy's is a little bit more tire fire-esque on the nose, I would say, which I like because I'm a big fan of Lecheg, so that is right up my alley.
Evan, I should have saved them for you, but if I eventually dumped them down the drain. I was given samples of these like 4 American single malts peated with peat from all over North America at one point
Oh
in time.
wow,
And I would say that 2 of whiskey, they were all completely undrinkable. One of them had peat from Northern Alberta, which is why I never consumed them. I mean, I even thought about marrying them in my little cask here, but I was like, I don't want to ruin what's in there. So I'm not going to do that. But
yeah.
the one that was like made with Alberta peat was insane. Like it was
Mhm.
just insane.
Yeah, it just doesn't work unless you get that food grade peat from the UK.
Mhm. Yeah,
I
it's
really like the nice dark color for such a young whiskey. It has a bit of a reddish tone
Hmm.
to it. I mean, it's kind of interesting that it's, I guess, just from the char.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's your essentially your prototypical bourbon color right there too.
Yeah.
Where it's a little bit coppery. But this is really drinkable stuff. Like the smoke is a
Yeah.
bit dry, but it still stays fairly juicy on the palate. Some nice sort of sweet fruit notes in the background there, mostly on the orchard fruit side of things for me.
chocolate covered jujubes.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah,
Yeah, a little bit of. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's good. The spirit's nice. It doesn't have any flaws. It again, it's kind of a bit one dimensional. But it's not bad. Like I like it more than, and I realize I'm damning with faint praise here, but I like it more than a lot of other American single malts I've tasted.
No, I do agree with that, and this is kind of like the peat forgives all sins style of young whiskey again, where it's the peat ends up being that dimension for a lot of people that are into younger whiskeys, and that's what it is for me as well.
Well, for those who aren't watching, I'm sorry to tell you the Leafs have won by once again manufacturing a penalty by diving like Italian soccer players in overtime. But anyway, we don't need to spend any more time dwelling on that or looking over at the screen to my right. Evan, or Marty, have you been able to chime in on this or not?
Just briefly about the color. And I'd say I agree. I think it was Evan said, but it is a bit one dimensional. It hasn't really developed a lot of depth in the flavor, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
it's just
it
full
is
on.
nice.
Yeah, it's just sweet, peat and sweet for the most part, straight across the board.
Yeah. All right. I'm excited about where we're going to end off on, but before we get to that,
Yeah.
what's on the
So-
revisiting our glorious past blog, Evan?
So this is another 1972, this time from Glen Glassa.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, 1972 Glen Glassa. This was quite a cool cask. It was not as sherried as the Glendronach 72, so therefore it was a lot harder of a sell. It also didn't help that it came about 9 months after the Glendronach 72, and the price was almost 100% more. I think it was like 70% higher than previously. But this was a really nice sherry finished cask of Glen Glassa, very tropical, fruity, spicy. And what's cool about it is, and actually this it's really more about the story of the revival of Glen Glassa, which is the distillery reopened in 2008. It was bought, I think, in 06 or 07 by a consortium led by a guy named Stuart Nickerson, who'd worked for William Grants before that. And the story at the time was that it was Dutch money, but it was apparently Russian money behind that was bringing this distillery back to life. But for whatever reason, they thought it would be a good idea to bring a distillery back to life that had been closed for 21 years. So when they reopened, the youngest stock they had was from 1986, if I remember correctly. And there was not a lot of it. Most of the stock was from the 70s. And even then, when I say most of the stock, we're talking, there was about 400 casks total. Like, think about that. Reviving a brand, bringing it back to life with 400 casks. When Billy Walker bought Benriach and Glendronach, there was tens of thousands of casks in the transaction, not just a couple of hundred. And so we had the privilege to bottle one of those casks. It was a great whiskey. Like some of the others, like the Glen Grant, which I mentioned in the blog too, was a little bit ahead of its time because people didn't really appreciate why this is as cool as it was. But a lot of those Glen Glassas that came out were great. And it was the only distillery that I know of in the history of the Scotch whiskey industry who launched their first core range with 21, 30, and 40-year-old whiskeys. Probably a feat that won't be matched again. I mean, Daft Mill got kind of close, I suppose, by waiting for about 13, 14 years, but kind of unheard of to do something like that. And the footnote to that is the 21 was actually closer to 26 years. The 30 was something like 33, and the 40 was 41 or 42 years of age, because the marketing advice they got was people will be more likely to buy it if it says 21, 30, and 40 on it. But again, it was a different time.
Gotta hit that 21. That's important.
Yeah, you gotta hit 21.
So do you think what you're talking about there with the lack of casks and the lack of operations for Glen Glassa, do you feel like that's what's kind of led to where we are with Glen Glassa now, which is kind of like this weird, like it's almost an also ran in that portfolio in a lot of cases?
I actually think the problem's a bit harder to get to than that. So if we'll all indulge me a couple of minutes for me to share an moderately qualified position on this. I think the whole purchase of Glen Glassa in the first place was a big mistake because they overpaid for a distillery that had almost no stock left. And that's why Benriach ended up acquiring it. I think it was around 2011 or 2012, like 5 to 6 years, not even after they'd reopened it, because they'd overpaid for it and it was going to take forever to pay this thing off. The bigger problem, and I hate to say this because the people we deal with at Brown-Forman are awesome, but I predicted that Brown-Forman would ruin Glendronach, Benriach, and Glen Glassa. And I kind of feel like that's what's happened because they don't know how to market something to a market that's chasing like whiskey nerds. They know how to they know how to create things that, you know, just your average consumer want. And I never fully understood the synergy behind Brown-Forman being the buyer of Benriach, the Benriach Co., which included Benriach, Glendronach, and Glen Glassa. And I think they struggle enough as it is to promote Benriach, let alone Glen Glassa, that like, or let alone Glendronach, that like Glen Glassa is this also ran. And it's kind of similar to what Beam is doing with Glengarry and Auchentoshan. It's like they don't know what to do with these things let alone Bowmore, because they're trying to promote Lefroy, but really what they really want to push is Jim Beam brands.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think those big American bourbon companies have no business running Scottish distilleries because they're useless. So,
Well, I was going to say on top of that too, I think part of the reason that Brown-Forman got into it was because they got to a point about 15 years down the road where they started getting rid of Lefroy.
that could be, but it's sad. And you know, you go to Bowmore. I love Bowmore. Bowmore was one of the whiskeys that really excited me about the industry. They're a company that back in the old days with Morrison Bowmores, they nurtured me as a retailer. They put me through as a keeper of the Quake. Incredible company. And when you go and visit Bowmore today, and you can tell like all the employees there are frustrated because they're like second fiddle to Lefroy, and yet they're the oldest distillery on the island. At one point, they were the brand, like especially like in markets like Canada. Like Bowmore was the number one selling single malt in Canada at one point in time. But now they're just like they don't know what to do with it, and it's truly really sad. So.
Well, speaking of Isla, since we've mentioned two distilleries, let's head to Kilchoman for our last dram of the night.
Yeah, which also has connections to Jim Swan.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and a pretty interesting bottle to have, because this is a bottling that has definitely seems to have undergone an evolution over the last say 2 or 3 years, where the Kilchoman Sanaig, when it was first released, and I think we actually had it as a mini in when it was first released in the calendar back in 2016, was it? But it's gotten quite a bit darker liquid wise over the since about 2020 or so, if I recall, to the point where we actually noticed it and we were wondering what's going on. I mean, it does say natural color right on the bottle, but it seemed like there was a lot more first fill sherry all of a sudden going into it over the last few years, and it had the bottlings that had preceded it.
Yeah, I remember at one point where I was looking at the color of the Sanaig, and it was darker than Loch Gorm, which is their straight sherry matured whiskey. And actually, some of our customers were getting mad. They're like, "Why isn't Loch Gorm darker? Why is Sanaig so dark?" And I remember putting this to Anthony, and like, I don't care. Like, if the whiskey's good, the whiskey's good. Like, who cares what it looks like? Like, that's not the point. But he said, yeah, just the cask that they had destined for Sanaig, a parcel of them, a big chunk of them now are darker sherry whiskeys than they used to be.
So there's
go ahead.
This is a bottling that's essentially like it's got some sherry cask finishing into it, but the way Kilchoman themselves put it, it's essentially 80% ex sherry casks and 20% ex bourbon barrels or ex bourbon casks that have gone into this. Pretty nice color to it. Not getting close to the coppery tone of the Boulder even. Stylistically, but definitely moving more into that coastal peat in a really nice manner.
Yeah. Marty, what are your thoughts on this?
I love the color, a good sherry tone, and so far on the nose, I'm not getting a ton of stuff, but I do pick up the peat.
Yeah, it's a pretty ozone heavy dram too. Yeah.
Well, lots of comments here, even people saying they never liked Kilchoman before, but they're really digging this. Lots of Sanaig is excellent. That's coming from, I think, Tom and Vi. Thick bacon campfire. Jeff seems to have COVID because he can't taste heat tonight. Just saying, maybe you've got the COVID, Jeff. You might want to get yourself tested.
Yeah, that's what they say is nosing peated whiskey is the first thing to go.
That's right. Well, I mean, I remember that when everyone at Kensington was sick in March, and I finally caught COVID, and I had to host a Glendronach tasting, and I had to get, I think it was Doug Page or someone to host it with me because I had zero palate. They all tasted exactly the same, which was like Scotch. And I remember being irritated back when I used to host tastings early in my career, and I'd ask people, what do you taste? And there'd always be that one smart ass in the room that said Scotch. You're like, get out. But that's kind of where my palate was at that point. I think this is gorgeous. It's very well put together. I mean, Kilchoman rarely disappoints, although the Madeira and Marcel, like some of those wine finishes, I've never been a huge fan of. But man, the Makir Bay, the Sanaig, the Loch Gorm, their core stuff, the casks that we've been offered over time are just lovely. And the sherry notes in this are great, but it's not overshadowing the peat or that citrus note in the spirit. It's beautiful whiskey.
I'm getting a little bit of cherry with some dark chocolate. So like if you had the cherry filled chocolate, but a really nice dark, little bit bitter chocolate. So.
Yeah, it's almost going, especially with that smokiness on the palate. It's going into like the aftertaste of an espresso too, in a really cool manner.
Yeah.
I see all these comments about Lecheg. This is what Lecheg wishes it could be. If I'm being honest with everyone here.
I love Kilchoman, but I don't think they're very close stylistically. That's for sure.
No. A little bit of bacon, but without the burning tire.
That's right.
So I just want to share a quick anecdote about Kilchoman, because to me, it was one of those whiskeys where I had an aha moment. Unfortunately, after the customer in question that finally tipped it had left. But back when they came out, it was vintage whiskeys. They were all 3-4 years of age, and they were almost all bourbon cask, very pale. And people would come into the store and they'd be like, "What's the peatiest whiskey you have?" And then I'd show them a bottle of Kilchoman that was like no like coloring or anything. And it would be like a light pale gold. And people would look at me and say, "It's not peaty enough." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? You can't see peat." And they're like, "It's not dark enough. Peated whiskeys are darker." And I finally got into it with this one guy who's like, "Lagavulin is peatier than that." And I would even pour them the whiskey and they'd be like, "Yeah, but it's not peaty enough." And what I didn't clue into at the time was that almost all peated whiskeys were coming in dark tinted glass bottles. And people were just assuming, because the glass wasn't dark, although they didn't know it in their brain, that this wasn't peaty enough. And yet this 3-year-old bourbon matured whiskey was way peatier than what they were drinking. And just how important some of those subtle signals are to people. And that Kilchoman was this aha moment for me. And I remember after that point being like, now, the glass is not tinted here, so don't think about the color. The color is not relevant, because notice how those bottles are either green or brown. This is the most interesting young peated whiskey we have. And I think it's a great spirit. I've been a huge fan and booster of Kilchoman ever since they started. I think what they do is phenomenal. This is kind of getting a long ways along the way. I remember when the first Sanaig came out. This is more mature, it's more complex, there's more depth to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the original Sanaigs were really good, but they weren't kind of really veering far off what the Makir Bay was or is. This is becoming its own beast in a really nice manner. Adam and Kate, we do have full-size bottles of this currently at the shop for sale.
$99, $20.99 for the minis, $99 for a full size. Now, Evan, before we go to the whatever today's bonus post was, which I don't remember, I think it was Aaron though. Am I right? Is it Aaron? Yeah. We are going to go back through one last time, do a quick pass, see how they evolve. Unfortunately, Evan and I can't man the hot stove lounge tonight, so we can't stick around late after tonight's tasting. But we are going to go back through the whiskeys one more time, just to see if they've changed, what we feel. And are we doing a vote? Is that a thing that's happening?
Well, why don't you talk about the Aaron, and I'll try and trigger or set that up.
What I'm hearing is Andrew, fill the void, and Evan, that is something I am excellent at.
Yeah, stretch that taffy, man.
Yeah, so let's put this up on the screen. Let's share, or can you share your screen and do what you? Oh, you probably can't. I probably have to share.
Give me a sec. I can probably figure that out.
No, because you need 2 screens, I think.
I've got that.
You've got the technology, okay. Also, Evan is much more computer literate than I am, so.
Oh, but you know what? Do I not have the ability to vote for some reason?
You
Or
know, you
set
don't
a
have
vote?
you don't have the ability to create the poll?
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, you know what? I do. So why don't you, so let's talk about the errands, throw them up on the screen.
Yeah, and then
Also,
we'll do the recap.
also, was it intentional to put 3 R's in the word errand? Or is that a type? Is that a
No,
classic
no, it
Kensington
was
typo?
not. There's wow, yeah, that is definitely a typo there. I'll have to fix that.
It's
I
Ah,
did
If
also
they had a
reverse the
pirate-
bottle shot there just to
If they had
make
a
it look like
pirate
the one
theme,
on
that would have
calendar.
been perfect.
Yeah.
So, also acknowledgement, it's pretty hilarious that none of us caught when we were so happy with how the calendar looked this year that none of us clued into the fact that our designer had accidentally reversed the errand and made it a backwards image. But I mean, it wouldn't be a Kensington wine market anything without some detail going slightly awry. And I think most people love and embrace us for the fact that we accept that we're far from perfect. But anyway, we've bottled a ton of Aaron casks over the years, more than any other distillery. I think in that post, I even acknowledged we've bottled, what is it, 14 and our 15th is on the way, or
Yeah.
13th or 15th is on the way, one of those two. A big chunk of those were from 1996, which is the first full year the distillery was in operation. We bottled a 17, we bottled a pair of 18s, we bottled a 19, we bottled 2 20s, a 21 and a 22. And the reason we were able to do this is for the longest time, no one appreciated Aaron. We weren't big enough to be Macallan or Dalmore's go-to retailer, let alone Diageo or some of the other big boys. So the companies that we naturally gravitated to working with were Aaron, Gordon MacPhail, Glendronach and Ben Riach in those early days, Compass Box. And what's been kind of serendipitous about this over the years is then in some ways these have become, or were, and people just didn't realize it, the most interesting brands. And yeah, we've absolutely adored working with Aaron over the years. It's a little more difficult to get 1996 casks out of them now. Not that that's actually what we're chasing. But we still love working with them. I think for a non-Jim Swan distillery that started up in 1995, they've done a very good job with their whiskeys. And in some ways, a lot of what they're producing that's now in its late teens and 20s is far better than the big name brands. And people are starting to catch on to this, and they're starting to catch on to the fact that it's better priced and better value. So yeah, we've had a great relationship with Aaron. And I think the last thing to acknowledge there is that they were a company that really understood what we were looking for, which was that we weren't just looking to put our brand on something so we could sell it, flip it, and make some money. This was really for us truly about identifying things that were great and not compromising on that. And we did this for reasons that were our own. We did them because like we couldn't afford for things not to sell. We didn't have deep pockets, or it was my boss's money, or even when it was my money originally, there was not a lot to be had, so it had to sell. And this is a company that actually would give us such good cask samples that it would be difficult to limit ourselves to just one cask a lot of times. And that's why we bottled so many Aarons over the years. And yeah, love working with it, and really excited about Lag, which has now got whiskey on the market, eventually going to be hitting the shelves in Canada. I think they've done it right for a startup. And they're keeping their prices reasonable. And I think this is something that's worth acknowledging moving forward. I've been, chicken littling the whiskey pricing here for quite a while now, saying like at some point something's going to break. And I think that's coming. And companies like Aaron have been reticent about pushing the price of their 18 and 21-year-old whiskeys too high, because at some point the market is going to catch up. And I know Glenallachie, these guys are conscious of it. Ben Romick, Gordon MacPhail are conscious of that. And So I have a lot of respect for them as a company because they don't want to just short-term rip off their customers, because they know when the market turns in a few years' time, it's going to be a lot harder for companies like Macallan to backpedal on their pricing than it's going to be for Aaron or Glenfarclas or Glenallachie or Compass Box.
Yeah, I got to say on top of that too, that we should probably acknowledge that we've had part of the reason we've been able to get all these Aaron casks is not just Aaron themselves, but the fantastic importer that we deal with in Alberta.
Chris and Kelly at Harvest Vintage are awesome.
Yeah.
Agreed.
But
and I mean, Evan, we could say the same thing. We've got 2 Pacific Whiskey Society whiskeys here tonight. We've got Crush Imports here. We've got Craftworks, Greg and Yarka
absolutely
here too. So yeah, there's a reason why a lot of these are coming from not the big companies. It's because these are the companies that want to work with us, and it's partnership. It's a two-way street.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure Marty can speak to Aaron as well, but it's Aaron's journey has kind of mirrored my own, at least within Alberta, for getting into whiskey, and it was cool because Harvest Imports were doing a lot of or brought in a lot of the younger whiskey well before they had 10-year-old whiskey from Aaron. And it's kind of what I cut my teeth on, was getting those weird corrugated cardboard boxes with all the different cask finishes in the early 2000s and mid 2000s when they started arriving. But some of the Aaron casks that we've had, I think it was the Twin 21s. One of them was more refill than the other one that were just fantastic for the KWM cask.
I think you're thinking of the 20s because
the 20s, you're right. Yeah.
Because we had a 21 and 22, which again, same thing. The 22 was darker sherry than the 21. But a lot of that, it was an opportunity for us to talk to people about how sherry casks are not all the same. And my theory on a lot of those casks, those twin casks that were different. And that's the other thing. We didn't just bottle 2 casks 3 times because we wanted to make more money. It was because they were noticeably different. And we wanted to be able to have that conversation and show people this is probably European oak sherry. This is probably American oak sherry. And this is why. You can taste the difference. You can see the difference in them. Yeah, the Aarons were a lot of fun. And I mean, unfortunately, nothing ever stays fully the same. I mean, we had Aaron as our private almost distillery in Canada for years. But we're still very well looked after by both Aaron and Harvest. So yeah, for sure. All right, Evan, we got to speed round this thing.
Yeah.
For no other reason than that my battery power is at 18% and counting, and I am way too lazy to go upstairs and get my power cord.
Oh, I thought you were reading your actual old battery power there, which would have made sense as well. So,
oh no, my other battery is at 75, at least 75%.
So back, starting to go around the horn again, back with the Kingsbarns. Still has that big citric note up front with the fruit notes as well. Kind of like a combination of lemon, lime, and pineapple right now for me on the nose. Yeah, just a fairly easy and approachable dram, a little bit of saltiness there, hint of smoke from the barrel char, but nothing crazy.
Yeah.
And then back to the milk and honey. A little bit more of the barrel char coming through for the milk and honey for me from those STR casks, perhaps. And a touch more of that red wine, sort of astringent coming through, which I find happens with red wine casks, where they go a little bit into a bit of a bitter territory for me.
What's really cool about going back to that milk and honey red wine cask now is having evolved in the glass, there's some really nice, soft, fruity undertones to it that I didn't pick up on before. I think that one's showing really nicely now.
Yeah, the palate is, I agree, the palate's really showing nicely. It's that horseradish note, I'm not getting that anymore. Could be going from
Okay.
peated whiskey to this, who knows? But I agree on the fruit side of things where it's like cranberries and maybe even a little bit of pomegranate in there, although it could be just talking about the pomegranate cask that's making me think that right now.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I don't have any left of my Cameronbridge because I shared it with some of the other whiskey staff at KWM because they were wondering if it would be a bottle they picked up. So there might be a few less on the shelf now.
It's very drinkable, as I said before. Like this is a sessionable whiskey.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, is it as complex as most single malts? No, but it's very tasty, very elegant. It's warming. Got a little
No,
bit.
this is honestly, this is what they should be bottling as Hague Club, as something like this.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure the Hague Club they're bottling is considerably younger than this because
Oh yeah.
they've got to pay a commission to Posh Spice's husband.
Yeah.
So
Maybe they'll make a special green tinted bottle or something like that where it's
for St. Patrick's Day.
yeah, like where it's a little bit older or
You know
something
what?
like that.
That would be an amazing amount of like marketing gone wrong. Like
Yep.
creating and marketing a product about St. Patrick's Day that's Scottish. That
Yep.
would be phenomenal. I would love to see a Hague Club St. Patrick's Day edition.
Mhm.
Scottish grain whiskey in a green bottle with a shamrock on it.
Yep. Okay, on to the Boulder. I mean, still smoky and peaty, still sweet. Kind of like a smoky peaty pancake syrup on the nose right now for me.
I can see that. Yeah, but like you're right, pancake syrup, not maple syrup. This is Aunt
No.
Jemima.
No, this is even maybe going into the butter flavored pancake syrup stylistically.
That's the classiest of all the flavors of pancakes.
That's the only stuff that hits the pancakes at our house, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, you've got 3 small children. You got to do what those kids want.
Hmm.
Marty,
Hey.
are you and Debbie fans of the butter flavored pancake syrup?
No. I like a straight maple syrup on mine.
Oh,
How do you feel about the barrel aged maple syrup trend?
I don't think I've tried any, so
You actually are missing out. I mean that genuinely.
so does it just end up nosing and tasting like PX sherry at that point? Because that's what PX sherry tastes like to me. It's maple
No,
syrup.
it's a smokier, toastier version of maple syrup, and
Cool.
it's kind of fun. But do I think single malt whiskey should be matured in maple syrup casks? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
So,
Only if it's bottled at 32% alcohol and not 40. And so
Now-
called whiskey.
now talking about smoky and syrupy on the nose, I think
Yeah.
that neat transition back to our Sanaig, which I'm sorry, but whether you like Pete or not,
Yep.
this is the absolute showstopper in tonight's lineup.
This is
Yeah.
right now it's like smoky Weetabix where you've dumped some olive brine on it for me.
This is bacon infused chocolate with cayenne peppers for me.
Hmm.
definitely bacon here. And that's a good thing for me.
Kilchoman always has that olive bar at Superstore note for me, where it's got that briny funkiness that goes along with it in a cool manner.
Did you say at Superstore?
Yeah. It's
So-
every time I pass the olive bar at Superstore, this is what it smells like.
Oh. So like, are you suggesting it's like fermenting or something?
Yeah, it could be. Like it doesn't have the smokiness, but it definitely has that sort of like oily brininess to it for sure. The olive bar, not the Kilchoman.
Yeah, being a person that has not enough time in the day, we're big fans of Instacart here because it means not having to go to the grocery store. But so it's been like probably 15 years since I've set foot in a Superstore. But I remember, like, didn't you have to bring your own plastic bags at one point in time or something? Like it was, you still have to bring your own plastic bags apparently.
Yeah.
Like this was like 15 years ago, and I was like, "What do you mean I have to bring my own bags?" Like I remember trying to like carrying my groceries out of the
Yeah,
store.
they were just essentially ahead of the trend, is what it comes down to.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Evan, I'm gonna trigger the poll.
Sounds
And
good.
then once enough people have started voting, I'm gonna put you and Marty on the spot here to tell me your favorites, because you guys don't get a vote. While we're waiting for the votes to trickle in, reminder, our third session is coming up on Thursday. So Evan and I, and possibly Marty, who knows, maybe others,
Not
maybe
sure.
maybe a special guest.
Ooh,
Involve reaching out to said person to ask if they want to be a special guest. But there might be a special guest. You never know on our tasting on the 15th.
Jim Murray's going to join us.
Jim Murray, yes. We're gonna ask him how he feels about the attention he's had in the press in the last few years.
I'm sure if he had it all to do again, he'd go back and like double down on the womanizing. So
Because he won't get another chance, you mean?
yeah, that's right.
Well,
Kelly's shaking her head in the background.
we probably shouldn't have mentioned his name, because over the last few years when we've made references to him, we've always said he who shall not be named.
Yeah.
And
we can't say it 3 times in a row. That's the rule.
well, regardless, we don't see or hear as much. Actually, here's an interesting side story to anyone. Does anyone remember hearing a press release this year about his whiskey of the year? Because I don't. It actually just occurred to me a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, man, I don't remember a time when I didn't have to hear some bullshit news story about his favorite pick of the year. So maybe he truly is canceled. And
couldn't get a big company to foot those marketing dollars or something.
Yeah, no one bought his whiskey of the year this year, apparently. Okay. How's the poll looking? I'm checking in on it. Everyone who's still tuned in, who we've not offended, has voted. So I'm going to end and before I share the poll, because the results are in, Marty, I want to know, what were your 2 favorites in tonight's tasting?
I'd say number 1 by a good margin was the Kilchoman Sanaig. The second was a bit tougher. I'm going to pick the Kingsbarn.
Kingsbarns, cool. Well, Marty, we like people to make decisions for themselves. What did you like about the Kingsbarn? What made that your second favorite whiskey tonight?
It is youthful, but it's got some nice, white fruits in there. It just, I'm just liking for the, it's a nice contrast. The Kilchoman's, bigger bodied, heavier on the palate. This Kingsbarn just, for me, it's just coming on just nice and light and more of a breakfast whiskey.
Evan.
I am also going to do the Sanaig as my first favorite, and second favorite, although it's tough because I did enjoy the whole lineup, I'm going to go with the Cameronbridge just because wasn't entirely what I was expecting versus having other sort of mid-20-year range single grains, which tend to be a lot more wood heavy. This one was just like really young and sprightly and effervescent still in style.
Yeah, the Cameronbridge is showing quite well. I really like it. It gets and I know this is unfair because I didn't ask you guys for an honorable mention or third pick, but being who I am, the Cameronbridge is my honorable mention. I think that's my third favorite tonight. I'm actually going to go with the Milk and Honey for my third favorite at the end. I think it opened up nicely.
Cool.
I think the spirit's interesting. I think it's got a lot to show. I'm excited to see some of the new releases. We are going to do a tasting with them in the new year. I've held back a bunch of bottles of stuff from them that we're going to do a tasting with. Partly because I'd also like people to hear their story. It's a bit of an interesting distillery. But I agree. I think unlike last tasting 5 days ago, I think we have a head and shoulders best whiskey in tonight's lineup, and I think that's the same. And I don't think it's in question.
Well, it's also like we've reached a point in time where we can have Kilchoman be the second oldest dram in the tasting essentially.
That is an interesting point. All right, I'm sharing the results. The first favorite by a pretty healthy margin is the Kilchoman Sanaig. Cameronbridge coming in second, Kingsbarns third, Boulder Peated in fourth for the first favorite. And for round two, Kilchoman Sanaig, oh no, sorry, I'm reading that wrong. No, Kilchoman Sanaig is also the second favorite tonight. With Cameronbridge coming in second, and then a tie between Kingsbarns and Boulder for third.
Yeah, it
Correct
must
me if
be a group that enjoys peated whiskey, because that's 19 out of 20 votes, unless I mean, I suppose there's somebody that voted for Kilchoman Sanaig twice, but
Well, my friend James, who's sitting beside me here, who didn't get a vote, is voting down Kilchoman. So he's no longer invited to join me for tastings in the
Wow.
future.
that
But
sounds like there's probably just more bitterness over that Toronto and over Calgary happening there than actually hate towards Kilchoman.
it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both, I think. But Evan, did we have something similar happen last week? Or am I confusing this with the Hunter Lang, the kinship tasting, where the second favorite whiskey was also the first favorite?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, it was the kinship tasting.
Yeah. Because that was kind of a stunning moment in time where the first and second favorite whiskey were the same whiskey. That doesn't happen very often. So it's kind of see that in macro form.